Hi guys, hi subscribers, welcome back to the channel. So in this tutorial we're going to be learning how to create this beautiful top. So I stumbled across this design of this top on Shein and I really loved it, and I said, oh my god, I must create this. So if you'd like this and you want to create this for yourself too, I'll be happy if you stick with me to the end. So I've divided this tutorial into two, and this is the pattern drafting tutorial. So let's get started. So I have already gone ahead to mark out the margins I'll be using for on my pattern paper, and from the top line I came down 1 inch, and from the side I also came down 1 inch, just so I can take measurements from the ends of my paper. So now for this garment, my neck depth is going to be 6 inches, so I'm going to place 6 inches on the top line like so, and I'm going to mark my shoulder to waist measurements. I'm using my lower waist for this project. Originally my shoulder to waist measurement is 17.5, and that's my natural waist, but I'm going to be using 18.5 inches for this, so this is going to be my waistline. So now with the 6 inches still on the top line, I'm going to be marking my shoulder to bust measurements, and my shoulder to bust measurement is 9.5. My shoulder to bust measurement is also my shoulder to nipple measurement. Square that across and label this my bust line. So with the 6 inches, remember the 6 inches is our neck depth, I'm going to be marking my armhole depth line, and my armhole depth line is my bust measurement divided by 6 plus 2.5 inches, and that's how I got my armhole depth or my armhole line. And I'm just marking that across, and I'm also squaring that across and label that my armhole line. So now with the 6 inches still on the top line, I'm going to mark my shoulder to underbust measurement, and my shoulder to underbust measurement is about 13 inches, so I'm going to mark 13 inches across this paper and label the underbust. So now we have all our outlines, and now we can place our measurements. On the waistline, I'm going to be placing my waist measurement divided by 4, and after dividing that by 4, on my bust line, I'm going to be placing my bust measurement divided by 4. Then also on the armhole line, I'm going to also place my bust measurement divided by 4. Then remember that we're going to be adding a dot to this, so we need to add 1 inch to our waist measurement. So I'm just going to be adding 1 inch because of the dot we're going to be adding, then connecting each point. Then on the top line here, I'm going to place my shoulder measurement divided by 2. So I place my shoulder measurement divided by 2, and that's what we placed on the top line. Then I'll just use my French curve and connect from the top line to the armhole line using a curve like so. So now after doing that, I'm going to place my shoulder to nipple measurement. So sorry, my nipple to nipple measurement, that's my bust span divided by 2. So I place it on my waistline, also place it on my under bust line, and also place that on my bust line. So that's my bust span divided by 2. Then I'm going to connect. Then I'm going to mark 0.5 inches on both sides, and that's going to be my dart intake. Then from the bust line, I'm going to come down by 1 inch because we do not want our dart all the way to the bust. So now I'm going to use my ruler and connect. So this is what we have, and now we need to contour the underbust, and I'm just going to be using 0.5 inches on both sides. So I'm marking 0.5 inches on both sides, and that's what I'm using to contour the underbust. Then I'll connect from the underbust to the dart waist line, touching each ends of the dart legs, then connect to that top line like so. And now we need to add our seam allowances, and for the side I'm going to be using 1 inch of seam allowances just in case of any kind of adjustments. You can use 0.5 inches, that's your choice. Then on the neckline, which is our top line there, I'm going to be adding 0.5 inches, and this is what we have. So now we can go ahead and cut this out. Remember that we're going to be making an extension here because of how the top looks like, so we'll just cut this out and I'll show you what to do next. So now I have another paper for my back piece, and this already has a zipper allowance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the front directly on top, making it meet the end line where the zipper allowance is, like so. Then I'm just pinning it down just so I can trace my front bodice out. So I'm out making sure highlighting the under bust line, the bust line, the armhole line, the neckline. So I'm just indicating it just so I can know where it is on the back. So I'm also doing the same thing for my waistline. Then I'll just take my ruler and I'll redraw this pattern piece on the back pattern underneath. So I'm just going to draw it from the waistline, the sides, the armhole, just tracing it out, and also the neckline. So now after doing that, I can remove my pins and I'm using my ruler to just make that line visible. So now what I'm going to do is I just wanted the back a little bit slanted, so I just came in came down 0.5 inches from the neckline like that, and I'm just going to use my curve ruler to connect. I later decided that I didn't want a zipper when I was sewing this garment, but I'll let you know later. So for the darts, what I'm just going to do is from the I'm going to place the midpoint of my waistline. Then I'm also going to place it on my under bust line. I'm also going to place it on my bust line, and I'm also going to place it on my armhole depth line and also on the neckline. So that is where I want my dart to be located, and I'm just going to use my ruler and I'm going to connect the points like so. So now I'm just going to mark 0.5 inches on each ends of the darts there. Okay, then I'm also going to mark 0.5 inches on each side here, and this is to help me contour the back. Remember that this is somehow like a bust here, so we can't just leave the back neckline like that, if not it will be falling, so we have to contour it. So I mark 0.5 inches on the neckline, then I'm just going to connect like so. So this is what we have. So we can decide to sew in that or we can decide to close it. So now our zipper allowance, we need to contour the zipper allowance just to remove any form of gaping from the zipper allowance. So what you should do is from your center back there, you're just going to come in by 0.5 and connect all the way to the neckline using a straight ruler. So this is what you should have. Then you have to replace that 1 inch back. So from that inward line that we just marked, I'm going to be placing 1 inch all the way round this line like so. Then I'll use my ruler to connect, and this is what we have. So now for me, I'm not going to be sewing this dart, so I'm just going to close it. So what I will do now is I'm going to be placing my allowance, and for the waistline I'm using 0.5 inches for the waistline. So I'm marking 0.5 inches, and that's going to be the allowance for the waistline. So I'll just square that across like this, then connect like this. This is just me adding allowance. Then for the sides, remember that the front already had allowance, so there's no need to add allowance here, but for the neckline we need to add allowance, so I'll be adding 0.5 inches of allowance on my neckline. So we didn't add allowance to the side because when we traced out the pattern, the front pattern, it already had allowance. So now I'm then closing the dart here because I do not want to sew it. But if you like to sew it, you don't have to close it. But for me, I do not want any darts on mine. So I just had to redraw the back neckline like so, because when I closed the dart, it altered it a bit. So I just redrew it. So now I'm just going to label this my back pattern, and I'm also going to make sure that I know that this back pattern has allowance so that I cannot forget when I'm cutting it. So now we're back to the front. So this is our under bust line, and what we want to do now is we want to cut out our under bust line. I have cut out the under bust line, and Now we're just going to be working with the two pieces. So first I'm going to close this dart over here because we're going to be using this for the extension. So this is the bottom half, so I'm going to close it and use my tape to hold it down. Then after closing it, I'm going to place it on a new pattern paper. So here I've placed it on a new pattern paper, and what we're just going to be doing is we're going to extend the waistline. So here from my waistline I'm going to be coming down by 5 inches, but I decided that I want the waist extension a little bit deeper, so I went ahead to use 5.5 inches instead. So you can extend it how much you like. It depends on how much extension you want. That totally depends on you, but I was okay with 5.5 inches from the waistline. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to take a curve and I'm going to connect this all the way, this extension all the way back to the waistline, like so. If you notice, I didn't connect it to the seam allowance. I connected it to the side of the waistline. I don't know if you get that. So now I'm just adding seam allowance of 1 inch. Remember that we added seam allowance of 1 inch at the side, so I'm adding seam allowance of 1 inch at the extension part. So here I'm just blending using my curve. Okay, so now this is the under bust, if you remember. So this is the under bust, so we need to add 0.5 inches to the under bust just so we can attach it later to the other piece. So we're adding 0.5 inches to the under bust. So now we're cutting out. Okay, that's all for that bottom piece. Now let's work on the upper piece, and this is going to be called our lining. So remember that the upper have gathers, so you see why we need this for our lining. So we're not going to do anything to this. So we're going to place this lining piece on a new paper. So I used the newspaper because we're going to be slashing and spreading it, and I didn't want to waste my brown paper. So what you want to do is you just want to trace this out on a new paper. But first I decided to add allowance to my under bust just so we can attach it to the other piece. Remember that the other piece we added 0.5 inches to the under bust. Remember that we cut out the under bust, so that's why we're adding allowance, just so we can join it back. So I'm adding allowance to the under bust, and I'm going to rule, okay, and just do this. So what I'm doing now next is I'm going to trace this lining piece on this newspaper by cutting it out like this. This is just me transferring the shape, or whatever you want to call it, of the lining piece to the newspaper, and I'm using my scissors and I'm just cutting this out following the shape. And this is what we have, and now I can just untape this. So please don't mind my English. And now we have this. So this is going to be our lining, so you need to keep this because we're going to be needing this. So this is our under bust. We have no allowance here for the lining, but we have allowance for this one because if you remember, we added allowance. So this is going to be our center front, and the center front is usually cut on fold. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create slash lines. So I'm just going to create any amount of lines you want. I'm just creating lines, no maths whatsoever. So I'm just going to label this 1, label this 2, label this 3, and label this 4. I decided to make this 2 4 because I decided that this slash were too much, so I labeled this 4, and I'm going to label this 5. And the reason why I label this is just so when I'm spreading it, I will know which is which. So after labeling, I'm just using my scissors and I'm cutting it out. Cut. Okay, so now we have our pieces. Now we need another paper. So here I have another paper, and I'm just going to start by drawing a start line at the side. This will help me when placing the paper. And what I want to do is I want to measure my under bust, and I'm going to multiply the result I got by 2 and add extra 8 inches to that. So it depends on how much gathers you want. That is, that is, so I was okay with multiplying my under bust by 2 and added extra 8 inches. So I'm just going to be marking out the results just so I know how wide I want to spread it. Most people just spread it like that, but I prefer doing this just so I know how much gathers I'm going to get at the end of the day. So I marked that result, that's the length, and I marked it at the side here, and I'm just going to be placing each pieces. But first we need to draw a start line at the bottom just so we can lay the ends on the line just so they can be equal length. So I'm just going to pin it down. I found it very very hard pinning this down, but it was still okay. So I'm just placing each pieces from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and I'm tracing it out using my ruler because I got too lazy pinning them down when at the end of the day I'm probably going to remove it. So I just decided to place it and ruler line, very very lazy way. So now this is going to be our front piece, and this is going to be our front bodice, and this is going to be our center front, which is what we're going to cut on fold. And this is one we're going to be gathering, while the lining piece is going to use to lining. So I hope you understand why we needed the lining piece and also this piece. So now we have two front pieces, one for the lining, one for the front block as the main fabric, and this already has allowance, so I put there with allowance so that when I know when I'm cutting this out, I'll know that I've already added allowance everywhere, so there's no need for me to add allowance anywhere. So here we have our blocks. Now we have our front, we have our back, we have our lining, then we also have the extension. And now the next step is to go through the cutting of the sleeve. So for the width of my fabric, I used my round armhole measurement plus 15 inches. So that's the width of my fabric, and for the length of the fabric, that was how long I wanted the sleeve to be. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to be placing this fabric on fold. So I place it on fold like so, and now I'm going to come down 1 inch because we're going to be adding an elastic at the top. So I came down by 1 inch. So from that line now I'm going to be marking my sleeve length. So I marked my sleeve length across, and I added extra 1 inch to the sleeve length, and this was because of the elastic we're going to be adding at the wrist. So now on the wrist line or the sleeve length line, whatever you want to call it, I'm placing my wrist circumference divided by 2 plus 15 inches, inches. Then I'm going to connect all the way to the wrist line. So now I'm going to measure from my neckline on my pattern piece, from my neckline to this underarm line like so, or armhole depth line. Then I'm going to measure it, and I got 2.5 inches. So I'm going to, from the top line, I'm going to mark 2.5 inches downwards and also mark 2.5 inches inwards like so. Then I'm just going to connect. So now I can go ahead and cut this out. So after cutting, I got another fabric piece which I put on fold, because if you remember, we need two pieces for the back, for the sleeves. We need two pieces for the sleeves. So I placed the folded parts on the folded parts, and I'm just cutting following the first sleeve we had already cut out before, just so we can get two pieces. So guys, after doing this, that will be all for this sewing I'm so sorry, that will be all for this pattern drafting tutorial and cutting tutorial. So our next video, we're going to be sewing the top step by step. So see you next time.